Welcome to the Coach Toolbox. This podcast is for coaches, leaders, and learners at all levels in organizations and in all walks of life. Here, you will get just-in-time learning that is research-based and practice-focused. The goal is personal and professional mastery. And now, our session today.
Well, all of us have bosses, and in many cases, most of our bosses are more or less human and within the normal range of being human. I say this because I've had the good pleasure of working with some who are quite psychotic and downright abusive. So wherever your boss is on the normalcy spectrum, you're likely to come across 4 types of reactions from the boss. The reaction depends on the situation, your performance, the current pressure, and of course, the boss's default personality setting. Here are 4 reactions that you might face from a boss. Understanding these reactions and where they come from can help you deal with the difficult situations more effectively. So in today's episode, let's understand the 4 reactions and share some suggestions on how to deal with these reactions which are not helpful for you or can even be downright hurtful to you. Remember that there is inherently nothing good or bad in any of these reactions. They are, after all, human reactions for all of us because they are part of who we are as humans. The challenge is that sometimes the boss tends to use one particular default style all the time, and that can be stressful for those of us who are not quite so thick-skinned. Also, my sense is that it's more accurate to say 4 types of reactions rather than 4 types of bosses, because any one boss, well, any of us really, can have these different reactions based on the situation and the person one is dealing with. And of course, please don't misunderstand me. I say this with all love and respect due to all bosses, especially if you are a boss. And certainly my own boss doesn't figure in any of this, and neither does yours. So feel free to share this episode with her or him. Now let's talk about the 4 types of reactions that we can experience. Number 1, the first one is the perfectionist reaction. The perfectionist reaction. This reaction happens when the boss sets a very high standard of performance and wants perfection in achievement, in behavior, and the process. Now, while an expectation of excellent quality is understandable and fair, a perfectionist takes it to a dysfunctional level by wanting to correct every word, every comma, and even the font. She or he will look at your work and find the 10% that is wrong and completely ignore the 90% that's good. Therefore, the reaction will be that the work is not good enough and the work is never good enough. Needless to state, this reaction never makes you feel good or encouraged, does it? It can lead to cycles of rework that really add nothing significant in terms of value. And the risk is that such a reaction can deflate you of motivation and even erode your self-confidence, especially if the reaction is combined with a foul mood. The perfectionist always has to add some value, irrespective of whether there is anything of real value in what he or she is saying. They just need to keep giving you that input. Their comments and expectations for correction or improvements are just like an annoying mosquito. Now, sometimes even we as parents can have a similar reaction with our children. For example, the little one shows you a report card with an 85% score, and your reaction is, well, you have to try to get into the 90s at least. And we often carry these perfectionist expectations in all areas of raising kids. So before we move on to the next reaction, let's just do a self-check to see how many times you yourself have this response when you interact with your child or spouse or direct reports and so on. And as you do this self-check on your own perfectionist reactions, figure out where this need to be perfect is really coming from. What are these old voices that you hear telling you to be perfect? Perhaps these voices are not relevant or applicable for you today, so it may be time to switch the tape. So it's important as we understand each of these reactions to look at it from a self-check point of view, because as we understand more about ourselves, we will be able to understand a bit more about why the boss continues to have a particular type of reaction. So we've discussed the perfectionist reaction. Now let's talk about the underminer reaction. So the second reaction is the underminer reaction. And this is a dangerous one because the underminer reaction is one that erodes your self-confidence and kills initiative. It undermines your self-confidence and kills initiative. That's why it's called the underminer reaction. So each time you put forward an idea or a creative proposal, the undermining reaction is one that negates it in a way that makes you feel worthless and incompetent. Now, the real fear behind this reaction is the fear of failure. And it can also be insecurity of the person who does not want you to get too visible or successful. A feeling of being threatened by you can also be a reason for this reaction. The underminer reaction can take the form of sarcasm or humor that puts a person down or shaming barbs. Or for example, hope this idea is not like your last one. Or last time you also made big commitments but nothing happened, so how can we believe you now? Or you only make big talks but really no action. Or closer to home, ये तुम्हारे बस की बात नहीं है. Needless to state, this reaction can make you feel vulnerable and inadequate and also feel stuck because you just don't get an opening or an encouragement to move ahead. You're constantly being undermined. In our personal space, I've often caught myself and see many other parents using this in interactions with their spouse or teenage kids. Whatever the other person wants to try, the reaction is, oh, you tried this before and it didn't work. You've already spent so much money on your silly ideas and they never work. You don't have the discipline to do this. Actually, you don't come from a business family, so you won't be able to start something on your own. So as we have understood the underminer reaction, think of times that you've used this reaction with a loved one, or with a direct report or a team member. Ask yourself, what was really behind your response? Was it an inner fear or an insecurity of some sort? Did you feel that success for the other person might threaten you in some way? As you make a note of these insights, what are you learning about yourself? What little changes can help you respond to the other person in a more helpful way rather than undermining? So we've discussed the perfectionist reaction and the underminer reaction. Next is the molder reaction. The molder reaction, that's number 3. So the molder reaction seems to be very deceptively sweet and caring. The molder reaction is one that's very sweet and caring, but the risk is that it wants you to conform or fit the mold. Fit the mold. That's why it's called the molder reaction. The voice says, this is the way we do things around here. If you want to succeed here, you have to fit in or women are not allowed to do this. Women cannot enter this profession or domain. Or you must become a doctor or engineer because dad is one. Or you must marry only within your fill-in caste, religion, community, whatever. So in a sense, the molder reaction wants you to think and act and behave in a way that fits in and does not disturb societal or cultural or organizational norms. No disturbance. The danger in the molder reaction is that it can be very sweet and polite and facades as caring for your interests. But you need to check if your interests are really being met. So if you fit the mold and conform, you get praise and promotion. And if you try and break or disturb the mold, there are punitive sanctions. Perhaps as parents, the easiest for us is to get our child to fit the mold so that it does not cause any turbulence that we have to deal with this disturbance. The risk, unfortunately, with the molder reaction is that we severely limit or kill the child's own needs and creativity and free thinking. The Molder reaction is a very common one for parents and bosses because it does not require the boss or parent to think or break out of their own comfort zone. And if you or the child tries to do it differently, then another reaction, a pet one of most parents, is the guilt tripper reaction. And this is the last one we will talk about, the guilt tripper reaction. But before we come to that reaction, talking about the Molder reaction, ask yourself, how many times do you use the Molder reaction to just get your child or spouse to conform and do it your way so that it does not create an overhead for you, an additional overhead for you? How would you be using the Molder reaction with your team members? And now as you do this self-checks, as you do this self-analysis, what are you going to do with these insights that will be helpful for you? So till now we've covered the perfectionist reaction, the underminer reaction, the Molder reaction, and finally we come to the guilt tripper reaction. Now the guilt tripper reaction makes you feel bad or shames you for something that you did or failed to do. It has the hardest impacts because someone you care about has been hurt or impacted in some way, and many times there is a strong element of truth in what happened or did not happen, and so that guilt leaves you really stuck in a corner. Now the power of the guilt tripper reaction lies in the fact that it makes you feel really bad or even unforgiven. So it has statements such as, how could you let me down? You've let our team down. I depended on you to do this. Or parents typically use, this shows that you really don't love me. Or if you do this, I will die, or dad will die, or fall ill, or die, or I'll kill myself. You want me to die, don't you? All these statements, whether to a colleague or a child, make the person receiving it feel really burdened and heavy. And if this is the feeling that your child or team member is now struggling with, how can he or she be productive or creative or energetic or engaged? You've just killed all these options with the guilt reaction. Sure, you may get one transaction done, but is this a sustainable way for you to manage your relationships? So do a quick think on how and when you resort to guilt to get things done by your child or spouse or any other person. How long would it be before the person gets immune to this reaction of yours? So what would be better ways for you to influence those who matter to you? Now, let's start pulling our conversation to a close by discussing some ways that we can manage these reactions. The 4 reactions we've talked about are the perfectionist, the underminer, the Molder, and the guilt tripper. These are 4 reactions that we are likely to experience from our boss or perhaps even from the significant others in our life. And I'm sure that you and I too can fall into using these unhelpful patterns. So if you're not sure if you use these reactions, why not check with your child or spouse or colleagues? They will be happy to give you feedback or input so that you can take baby steps towards changing. Well, the question that remains is, how do you and I deal with these reactions when we are on the receiving end, especially from the boss? And at the end of each reaction, I've shared some thoughts on how to understand the deeper aspects of that reaction, and it starts with oneself, that is you. Understanding this about yourself will help you appreciate why the other person tends to react that way. Remember, we are all humans, right? So if you understand the way you react, chances are you will have insights about why another human being also reacts. Mostly it's likely to be in the same way. In addition to the self-analysis and insights, here are 4 steps that you can take to manage the reactions more effectively in real time. Now remember, we cannot change anybody else or how they react, but we can certainly change the way we look at the situation and how we respond. So step 1. Now, if you want to learn to deal with these unhelpful reactions, a radical starting point for you and I is to understand the ways we ourselves react in various situations and with different people. So step 1 is to observe yourself over the next few days. Absolutely. Observe yourself over the next few days. What situations trigger different reactions in you? Which people trigger a particular type of reaction? As a parent, observe the way you interact with your children over the next couple of weeks. Observe the way you interact with your spouse. The reason I'm encouraging you to do this is because step 1 is to recognize the different types of reactions, first within yourself, and to understand what triggers this type of reaction within yourself. Is it the person or is it the situation? What is deep behind the reaction? Is it some fear or anxiety or anger that triggers this reaction? Step 2. If you can track these self-reflections in your journal, diary, or mobile device, it'll help you capture this valuable information about yourself. And at the end of 2 weeks, look at the data and see what you understand about yourself. This is step 2, to distill and capture insights about yourself. Step 3. Now, the reason step 2 was important, and you cannot skip it if you want to learn to deal effectively with critical situations, whether from your boss or family member, friend or in-laws, is that step 2 will give you an idea of the 2 or 3 prominent types of reactions that you have. These are like voices in your head or parts of your inner self that tend to get triggered in different situations. Once you are able to identify the dominant 2 or 3 voices or types of reactions that are part of you, then you will be able to identify when these voices or reactions are triggered by statements made by your boss or anyone else who is critical of you. As you become aware of the voices within you, you start to feel a bit more in control and are not likely to be so badly affected because you know which inner voice or which part of you is being triggered and why it gets triggered. This is a key element in learning to deal with the negative impact of unhelpful reactions from your boss or anyone else really. Step 4 is a firefighting technique for the moment you get triggered by the boss or anyone else. In the real-time scenario that you might face at work and that triggers you because of your boss's or someone else's reaction is to breathe deeply, breathe out deeply and slowly. So this is a very useful technique to calm your system down. Breathe out deeply and slowly. Now you don't have to do this in a way that is very noticeable or dramatic. Just do it very quietly but consciously and do it a few times. What research states is that slowing down your breath by slow, conscious, deep exhalations will calm the physiological systems that have got excited and give you space to think through a more reasoned response or just let go the situation and perhaps get back to a self-recovery process that works for you. So slow, conscious exhaling will also support you in step 3, which is to recognize your own internal voice that is reacting to the triggers of your boss's comments. So remember, slow, conscious, deep exhalations. Now, as we conclude for today, these insights require some deep work for each one of us and cannot be done just via a podcast. So I also encourage you to work with a coach or counselor who can support you with some deeper resolution. It's a great investment in yourself and worth the time and effort. Finally, as we close our conversation today, remember to hit the follow button on this podcast channel and do share this episode with people you care about, especially your boss. And be sure to mention that she or he is not like these other hurtful bosses. All the best.
And that's it for today. Thank you for listening. Please connect with us on coachtoolbox@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to follow, subscribe, and review this channel. Details of our ICF-approved coach training programs and our services as executive coaches and coaching supervisors are on www.globalcoachtrust.org. See you in our next session.